In fact, I think that with the generative AI, many concerns around insufficient data comparability, the amount of data, disclosures overload, insufficient data structure will just go away, in fact. And finally, in a world where artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence plays a significant role, I think human touch and human interactions are becoming increasingly important. I called it human touch. I think you called it magic at the beginning, right? And this magic comes when we all, preparers, users, auditors, standard setters, regulators come together. So we need to continue to do that, to discuss, to brainstorm, and in doing that, somehow moving the financial reporting and corporate reporting overall to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Margajata. The good news is financial reporting is at the core of corporate reporting, and it is still relevant today. I think we have to progress and make progress on financial reporting to make it stay relevant. We have to embrace technologies. And what I hear today is that while it's sometimes very burdensome and excruciating to follow the due process, I think it's important to keep on having a dialogue, communicate with each other, achieve consensus to progress financial reporting to make it stay relevant. With that, thank you very much, Andreas, Margajata, Anne, and Serge for being on the panel today, and thank you all for listening. That brings the meeting panel to a close. Thank you.
So we have now the fireside chat from policy to practice, the future of corporate sustainability reporting in Europe. So I ask Patrick and Wolf to join and to manage I think there is a video also. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Wolf. Take down at the middle, huh? Yep.
So, do you hear me? Yeah. So good afternoon, in fact, to all, and we are very pleased to have this fireside chat. So I would like to first of all invite our guest, Mrs. Lara Wolters, who is in person, to join us, if I may. Mrs. Wolters is the vice chair of the Legal Affairs Committee with the nickname Jury Committee, and she follows carefully all the developments of sustainability reporting and other regulations in that space, like the CSDDD. So we are very glad to have her in person today. We invited also Mr. Kyoshyuk, who is the chair of the jury committee, to come. He accepted, but at the last minute difficulty, so he recorded a message. So without further ado, so sorry for the fireside chat. We're missing the chimney, we're missing the logs, but we will fire questions. So with that, without further ado, I suggest to listen to the message that Mr. Kyoshyuk was kind enough to record for us.
It's my great honor and privilege to address you today for the EFRAG annual conference, which brings together an exceptional group of experts, policymakers, practitioners, and stakeholders from across the reporting landscape. As sustainable reporting gained momentum during the past years, the Legal Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, which I chair, had intensive contacts with EFRAG. Our cooperation was particularly important when we negotiated the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. At the time, a contact group between my committee members and EFRAG was established. I'm happy to tell you that the Legal Affairs Committee decided to reconvene that contact group for the coming parliamentary term and make it a permanent fixture. That permanent contact group will be greatly needed. You also that the new Commission intends to reduce reporting obligations across the board. That will probably mean looking into CSRD. Members of the Parliament generally agree with the objective of simplification. The Draghi report was a chilling reminder of the environment our businesses evolve in. But as Commissioner Dombrovskis said during his parliamentary hearing, that the simplification does not mean the regulation. So when the Commission comes with its proposal early in next year, we will need your expertise to help us identify what measures fall within the objective of simplification and what falls under the category of the regulation, or just we need your help here. We also know that the world is looking at us because the global race of setting standards is a reality, and because investors worldwide need visibility and security. There are trillions of euros in sustainable finance waiting to be poured in a safe, audited, sustainable companies. This is good for our economy, our planet, and ultimately our citizens. So we count on your support, and I look forward to welcoming your representatives to the Legal Affairs Committee. Allow me finally to express my gratitude to all of those who worked to make this event possible, for all of your attending and contributing to these vital conversations, and to my dear friend Wolf Klintz for the invitation to address you. Thank you.
Wolf, you as a former MEP, you have the privilege of asking to start the firing questions.
First of all, I'd like to say I've known Ilan now for some 10 years. We were together in the parliament from 2014 onwards. I left in 2019. He is still there. And we were both members of the liberal political group, now called ALDE at the time, now called Renew. And he has had a few leading positions in the international ALDE family. And so I think it's quite an achievement that he's now become the chair of the committee. Now, so you have to answer all of those questions now, and you cannot point to your colleague. So I'm sorry, but we are looking forward to getting some insight from you. Now, I will start with what I alluded to already in my short presentation. Incoming President Trump intends of the oil and gas sector. One, you can? Does it work? Okay, thank you. So, hear me better now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So the incoming President Trump intends to reduce or even eliminate all regulation of the oil and gas sector and abandon the ESG criterion in the financial sector. What measures should or could the EU take to make sure that the EU standards framework is not seriously hampered by Trump's policies?
It's a nice one to start with. Small question to start with. First of all, thank you very much for having me. Nice to be here despite the lack of logs. Maybe AI indeed could help us fix that in the future. It's nice for me to get a little bit of an insight into what's happening in the the world of reporting and accounting. I didn't know that there was talk of using VR or indeed generative AI. I'm not surprised. Maybe we're looking at a future world in which even members of parliament can be replaced by holograms, who knows, or at least we could duplicate ourselves so that we can attend more events at one time. But either way, thank you for having me as a generalist amongst specialists. I'll do my best to answer some of the questions here from a more political angle, I suppose, and from the angle of what I've been working on. But when it comes to President Trump and his push for be it deregulation, anti-woke policy to do with oil and gas, I think the most important thing that we need to do as Europe is stay on track. Stay the course, finish what we started with the Green Deal, and make sure that the transition of our European economy into a future-proof economy becomes a success. And maybe that sounds very reasonable, but I think we're in a very volatile time where there's push over here to start deregulating. And at the moment, I think we're in a time in the European Parliament or in Brussels where the dust still needs to settle. We're looking at a new European Parliament with different majorities. We're looking at a European Parliament that is more right-wing. I think what we need to find out now is what that will mean for policy making in the future. What I hope it won't mean is that majorities will be sought over the right more often than they were in the past. I think there's been some experiments thus far, not all of them successful. I think Ms. von der Leyen has made it clear that she wants to build on a pro-European platform in the Parliament. I think she did it in rather a nice way as well, that pushed Mr. Weber back into his place a bit. But I think all of that will be very important if we want to stay the course on our objectives on sustainability and the Green Deal. What's happening in the US, I think we'll come back to it. But I think what's important there is for us to lead the way, but more importantly, to lead the way and show that we can put our money where our mouth is. And how we do that is by investing resources, people, into the processes that are needed, for instance, under CSRD. And what it doesn't mean is flip-flopping on policy.
So can I now deep dive a little more? Because, of course, there is an echo here in the EU that we are rule makers, but we are not investing enough. So, and you are mentioning the the allocation of capital flows to the right investments. So I would like to focus maybe on ESG-related data now, since you were an MEP in 2022 when the CSRD has been adopted by the Parliament as a very significant piece of legislation in the context of the Green Deal, which you mentioned. So could you share with us your view about the relevance of its objectives and current implementation course by reference to the current call for competitiveness for the EU businesses? How to combine priorities?
I can try. I think that when it comes to ESG objectives and CSRD, I think there's a little bit of a false narrative among some that legislators came together, put their hands together and said, how can we make life difficult for companies and ask them to report? I think that is a gross misconception of what happened. And if I were to say why the CSRD started materializing, why proposal came forward, you'll correct me if I'm wrong in a room full of specialists, but it's because markets are asking for granular and comparable data more and more. And the reason I think that they ask for that data is that markets know perhaps better than anyone, but that the material world that we live in is changing, and that the fundamentals that our markets are built on are slowly ebbing away if we don't act on sustainability now. And that market data, or that data that is asked by investors, by banks, to those seeking to grow their companies, I think is legitimate in showing which companies are future-proof and which perhaps are not. And the CSRD tries to give hands and feet, as we would say in Dutch, to that data, making it into a useful tool. And in the meantime, of course, to make an omelette, you need to break some eggs. And I think that you are doing a laudable job in making the CSRD practical in implementing it in a way that companies where there's enough breakdown for companies in what it is they truly need to do. But I think at the moment in Brussels there is a shift to those saying that we've overdone it all, that in the context of the Green Deal there's been over-regulation and that now we need to completely change course. As I said before, I think that is a type of flip-flopping that is extremely unuseful to companies. I think it actually gives those companies that already started their work, those companies that aim to be front runners, the wrong signal because it punishes them. I think it tells them, well, in spite of your investments into compliance, in spite of your investments into the people needing to make this happen, you can now stop all that work, and those who didn't do anything will be at an advantage. That is not useful. And what we need to do as policymakers, as I said before, is stay the course and always remember why we're doing this in the first place. And that's because this has always been about business-threatening material risks to companies. And I think that if we don't do that, then we'll be overtaken by markets themselves, possibly by other continents, which at the moment, I think we're still in the lucky position to have them looking at us and trying to follow us. But policy flip-flopping here, I think, is the worst that we could do in a time where there's already uncertainty and where there's already people trying to make most with the bits of legislation that now need to slot in place.
Over the past few months, the ISB has published a number of important standards or amendments: international tax reform, power purchase agreement, IFRS 18, and so on. These are being adopted into European law through the European endorsement process. This process takes a lot of time, at least in the eyes of some citizens, some professionals, some preparers, etc. For urgent changes, this process is being considered to be too long by companies that would like to apply the standards immediately. How can the endorsement process be improved and made faster?
On the endorsement process or the international process, I don't know if that was the question, or generally if this is about the fact that EFRAG needs time to develop standards. Right.
Excuse me. No, the question is in relation, we have two pillars. So in the sustainability reporting pillar, we elaborate technical advice, draft standards, but on the financial reporting side, we are in an endorsement capacity. So we influence as from the beginning, but then at the end of the day, we are communicating to the Commission if it is desirable to endorse or not, or with caveats. So in that space, the question is, do you see ways to accelerate the process and be mindful of the need for clarification when it's coming?
I don't know if I'm best placed to answer that. What I do know is that it's extremely important for EFRAG to be able to do its job. And I think for that in the European Parliament, what we've been pushing for before and what we've underlined a number of times is that it's important that in all of this, when it comes to either the more technical side of the legislation as level 1 or internationally, that it's important that we have enough resources, enough people doing that work in practice. And what I notice at the moment is, because of the pushback on some of these standards, because of the pushback generally of those who say there's too much going on in the world or in Europe at the same time, we can no longer keep up, is that instead, I think, of then questioning the underlying principles there, instead of questioning the framework itself, I think what needs to be done is for us to focus much more and much more resources on all those flanking measures that can help actually implement. And to give an example, there's due diligence legislation that you might have heard of coming up. That's the CS-DDD. And in that CS-DDD, there's extraterritorial effects also that a number of countries, of course, are looking at. What you could do is, as a country, push back on that and say, we never asked for this, like in the US, we don't agree. What you could also do, of course, is make sure that you're prepared. And as the EU, make sure that those countries or those sectors and geographically, those areas out there in the world that might be impacted, that those have the relevant information so as locally to be able to prepare. And I think that all of those things, all of those flanking measures, resources, detail, even events such as these where experts come together to make all of this work is what's needed, rather than a questioning of the fundamentals or the underlying principles. And maybe just to come back on ESG generally for a moment, I think that what, from where I'm sitting, markets are showing at the moment also is that this pushback is not yet materializing into actual shifts in investment. And I think that what you can see is that in the US, there's a different outlook. I think there has been funds that have been depleted or money moving away from it. I think in Europe, that's not the case. And I think the reason is that we know that on all of these underlying principles, for CS-DDD, for CSRD, that all of those are sound when it comes to governance, when it comes to making sure that value chains are robust, when it comes to companies pledging to get to net zero. All of those are goals that are fundamental and needed, and perhaps the political buzzwords might change, but I think the reality that underlies it does not.
So if I I think you have been very clear on the objectives and the fact that, at the end of the day, the provision of reliable data, both on the financial side and the sustainability side, is a key element of the landscape. So the objectives are clear. Now, you mentioned the objective of simplification and burden reduction. So what is your view on this? How to achieve that? What is your reaction to the Draghi recommendation to create a mid-cap category? Would that be enough? How do you assess the risk of green or ESG washing as compared to simplification? Because there is possibly a trade-off here. And okay, how do you see people and planet being considered properly for a sustainable future via transparency and accountability? So it's a very generic question. I'm sorry, but the devil is.
Gentlemen are really making me work for my lunch here. These are 10 questions in one, but let's see.
I'm sorry to be the last man standing between you and lunch.
That's fine. This is my job. I will try to remember the various questions that you asked. Perhaps first on the mid-caps proposal and the Draghi report. I think that nobody is against simplification. I think you'll be hard pressed to find a member of parliament that stands up and says simplification is something that my political group rejects or otherwise. The goals of simplification, of making sure that there is no overlap between different pieces of legislation in a time where, if we're honest, of course, the Green Deal did, just like after the financial crisis, create a lot of new pieces of legislation. That is something that at least the pro-European platform, let's say, will put itself behind. I think the danger is that at the moment there's a lot of uncertainty, and why is that? That's because the Draghi report is rather clear, but the signals that have come from the European Commission on how some of those recommendations might be translated into new policy have not been clear. And I think that Ms. von der Leyen has shot from the hip in announcing that the push for deregulation will come in the form of an omnibus proposal, and I think she's shot from the hip by doing that without by the looks of it, informing her services on what this would entail in practice. I think that, again, is extremely unhelpful because it creates uncertainty. There's lots of rumors going around at the moment, again, that make businesses question what they might have done so far already. And I think that is something that we need to guard against. And so if in a vacuum, let's say in a perfect world, we were just to look at simplification now and say, with the Draghi report in our hand, what is it that we can do to make sure Europe is competitive and that we reduce some of the burden of reporting, for instance, fine. The reality in the European Parliament and in Brussels at the moment is that nothing is fine as long as we don't have a clear working method yet with a pro-European majority. As long as there's those who do enjoy, let's say, the bandwagon of some of the populist rhetoric around ESG, around that we've gone too far. And so any proposal that would come now, I think, risks breaking open other parts of the legislation that you're in charge of, that I've made, and so forth. And so I would say I caution against the proposal that will come, and I also caution at the moment against a mid-caps proposal, again, of which the form is not very clear yet, but that potentially would carve out companies or would say, well, these and these companies don't need to abide by this legislation anymore. I think it creates uncertainty, but also part of the work that we have done is we've done that because we want European companies to grow. We want them to have access to funding. We want them to be able to show transparently why they are worth investing in. If we say with the mid-caps proposal that companies will be carved out of legislation, I don't know if we are actually doing them a favor.
Incidentally, maybe a follow-up question. No, that's fine. Thank you. A follow-up question. A number of member states have not transposed the CSRD, as you know. So what is your recommendation? I hear that in certain countries there are recommendations to apply, even if the transposition has not legally taken place. I mean, public authorities are mentioning this. This is one option. Other options, people say, this is a technicality we don't know. And others say, well, maybe it's not necessary to transpose because it's going to be changed. So that the level of uncertainty that you are mentioning is, in our view, pretty detrimental. I would say from a very egoistic standpoint, for EFRAG, it's not easy to work in such a context, but that's not the key point. The key point is, what about the stability of the legal landscape in the EU? Do you have a view?
My view is that if there's legislation, then it needs to be applied. And if not, we have a European court that can deal with cases of member states not transposing. And my view is that if, as European Parliament, there is a majority for a piece of legislation, and if it goes in the official journal, then it needs to be applied and rolled out. And I think that it's unwise of the leader of the European Commission to go and put that in question, even if this was unintended. And I think that at the moment, as I said, what is needed is to make sure that of those pieces of legislation that we have, for which we have very good reason, that we make those into a success. And for you, the standards that go underneath the CSRD, those standards are meant to help specific sectors, to help on specific provisions, for instance, as climate. So let's make sure that those are there. And then you can always talk about, you know, is there a staggered implementation needed? Is in time, is it a good idea to go and review? In most pieces of legislation, of course, we talk about review periods, but we talk about them after the fact. We talk about them after legislation has been transposed and after the effects can actually be seen and can be analyzed. And what's happening at the moment is we're putting the cart in front of the horse because we're saying, well, actually, maybe some things need to be changed. For you, that creates uncertainty, but for businesses, if for you that would also mean that the standards that you need to be working on are put into question, companies will still need to apply the CSRD, but they'll have to do that without the standards then if for you it's become uncertain what to work on or not. Again, it's extremely unhelpful. There was one other point I wanted to make, but it'll come back to me.
Oh,
Okay,
please.
Let me address you as Vice Chair of the Legal Affairs Committee. And so the question does not concern sustainability or environment, etc. You do know that the European Parliament works with regulation and directives. And directives,
I do know that.
and directives leave a lot of room for member states to include national specificities in the thing. So my question is, shouldn't we or should not the European Parliament use more regulation rather than directive?
I'll be glad to answer that, but maybe just the point from before that I had wanted to make was that when it comes to this proposal from Ms. von der Leyen, and consequently also the uncertainty perhaps for EFRAG in doing its homework, I think the idea on this is reporting, right? I think the red thread through it, or what's supposed to be the common denominator in the proposals that were mentioned as needing to be part of this omnibus, which, by the way, it was set as an example. It wasn't set in stone that these are the piece of legislation, but it was said taxonomy, CSRD, CSDDD. I think the idea was that the common denominator there is reporting, and I just want to underline, and I've said it a few times before already, but that in CSDDD there is no reporting, that the reporting on CSDDD is actually in CSRD. And so this proposal, again, it seems like it's a way of putting the cart before the horse. If it is about reporting, then I think it needs to be much more clear in what way these pieces are supposed to fit together. I think at the moment there's unclarity on what even the core of it is. And then as to directives and regulations, I think it would be a gross generalization to say that we would be better off with regulations in principle. I also think member states wouldn't allow it. I mean, I'm sure you have been in trilogues and in the dynamics of power play between member states and the parliament, where there as co-legislators. But of course, in practice, it's rather hard to break through a wall of member states who say this is our competence or our prerogative, or don't touch this or that. So I think member states probably wouldn't be too happy with that. I think, incidentally, there's rather a lot of gold plating going on in member states, even gold plating from governments you wouldn't expect it from, even on let's say the center right and the right, where often it's criticized. It's happening quite a lot. But I think the difficulty in any legislation is always making sure that it's fit for purpose. And my experience during the CSDDD was that if we went into detail, we were criticized because often it was said, oh, but this is patronizing. Companies know what's best for them. They will know how to apply this without going into granular detail on requirements. And if we didn't put in detailed requirements, the criticism would always be that legislation would be much too vague and nobody would know how to apply it. And I have a feeling that similarly with directives and regulations, whatever you pick, you're always going to find yourself on one side of that battle, or you'll always have people criticizing you that, you should have really done things differently. And yes, on a regulation on CSDDD, yes, maybe some uncertainty wouldn't be there if you had that. And at the same time, I think in this area of legislation where we're talking about human rights and social rights and labor rights, it would go quite far to say to member states, you need to do this, but you cannot go further at all in, for instance, asking that trade unions be involved. Or I don't think member states would accept it. I think politically it'd be unwise as well.
Okay, so last question before the lunch. No, I would like to focus maybe on SMEs, because they are a critical part of the EU economy. And, part of what we hear is in fact fixing maybe what is expected from very large companies, what is expected from smaller large, therefore the mid-cap category, which could maybe operate under a simplified standard, not being carved out from the scope, but reporting under a different standard on sustainability matters. But you have the non-listed SMEs. And so at EFRAG, we have elaborated a simplified standard, which we call voluntary SME, VSME, which is based upon 20 indicators only, which has received a good support from various communities, the communities, i.e. the SMEs themselves, the financial institutions that need the information, and also the companies in the value chain that need information. So is there, in your view, a support for this, and is there a good chance that if adopted, which we feel should be the case, there will be a virtuous circle that would involve SMEs in the sustainability reporting momentum in a way that is proportionate and appropriate?
I hope so. I'm not an expert on SMEs, and so I don't want to talk for SMEs and say certainly, and that's how it needs to be done. But my intuition would say yes. And I think there's various reasons for that. But as we know, in various pieces of legislation, CSRD, CSDDD, and others, even if SMEs themselves might be excluded from scope, very often they still feel the effects of legislation. The trickle-down effect, let's say, into smaller companies, and if you're not careful and you don't legislate for it, even the strangling effect of legislation being passed down, that's something you need to guard for. It's important that if we ask of larger companies to report on certain things, that they can go and ask SMEs, but not that they pass on, let's say, the hot potato to SMEs in ways for which SMEs aren't prepared. And hence the importance, I think, of supporting SMEs as much as we can in then doing the reporting that is then asked by larger companies, or being able to give insights into their own value chains. I don't think that by carving out SMEs with a blanket exemption anywhere, that the reality of larger companies having them as part of their value chains, or the realities of larger companies or banks, if they go to a bank for a loan, asking for more granular information, is going to change. And so again, I think what's important is flanking measures, let's say, in supporting SMEs. I think for listed SMEs, that's one thing, but the voluntary standard for SMEs that can be used for those SMEs who then also want to grow in the future, which is of course often, you know, the path that an SME would want to go. What needs to be done to support that? And I think that the standards that you're working on can support that. What I have found difficult is that in the past years, sometimes it was hard to know exactly who spoke for SMEs. I have a feeling that there's a number of different organizations who have said we are the voice of SMEs in Europe. But then I think that what would be really helpful is to really have one voice speaking for them in a let's say in a way that as a legislator you can be certain, because the messages that reached me were from time to time, this is absolutely not doable for SMEs, this will be the death of them. And at other times it was, no, absolutely, we need to be a part of CSDDD, we need to be a part of CSRD, because there's no other way for us to grow if we don't jump on board, let's say, right from the get-go. And if we don't jump on board, but we need to go and step in later, only as we grow, it'll be too late and it'll hamper our chances of growing. And so that's been a tension that we've had to try to build into the legislation. But it's been a challenge at times because it's not been always entirely clear, including because I think from certain member states there's been a really big push against, led by some SMEs. So, but I think that the work you're doing there is hugely important.
In 3 minutes, we're going to have lunch. So very short question with the, and I ask you to also be brief in the answer. Now, I do know from experience and from my past experience that there are some MEPs in the Econ Committee and also in the Legal Affairs Committee that are interested in standard setting. And my question is, should there be a more formalized contact between these MEPs and EFRAG through maybe regular meetings at certain intervals with a calendar, etc., or should we go on as now that we have only occasionally direct contact?
I think that contact needs to be, indeed, Indeed, I'm almost wondering if this is a trick question now, but indeed what we want is a regular and institutionalized dialogue between the Parliament and EFRAG. I myself am in the URI committee and in the Econ committee, and I think that that gives me a very good sort of visibility on the importance of having that dialogue, and that contract group is being re-established now to make sure that we are on the same page in Parliament and on Square de Meus, if I'm not mistaken, on all of this important work that's going forward. And I think that for us, it's important that we're able to support that work and try to push back, as I said, against that unnecessary uncertainty that's being created at the moment.
One final word before we earn our lunch. One final.
Oh, for me,
Yes, for you.
Free speaking. I think I've said it before, but I really believe very strongly in that the goals of the Green Deal, the goals of the sustainability reporting, all of those are valid, they're sound, they're future facing. And I find it very important that we don't get distracted by some of the noise going on. I find it important that we don't get distracted by a Trump election, by an alternative economy in the works, I think, in the US that's ideologically motivated, that we don't get distracted by rumors flying around in Brussels, but that, as I said, that we stay the course and that we stay clear-eyed on what it is that will make us future-proof. And if we're in a world where Mr. Draghi says that we need 800 billion a year in investment to be able to go through a transition in our economy that is vital to maintain jobs here, to make sure that we matter in the world of tomorrow, that we're not rule takers, but that we're rule makers, then I think that data and reporting and making sure that there's sound information out there is hugely important, because that 800 billion has to go somewhere, and I think it needs to go to the places where it matters and where strategically, where there's a point in doing that. And I think that in the Parliament we have a role in staying the course, as I said.
Thank you very much. A round of applause.
So please try On. Let's start our afternoon session. So the next topic is sustainability reporting developments, an EFRAG perspective with Patrick de Corbourg. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Good afternoon. I don't know what is better, to be the last man standing between someone and lunch or to be just after lunch. I don't know. So if I hear someone, in the audience, I will think that my speech is not appropriate. So wanted to give you a few snapshots on where we stand in terms of sustainability reporting. It has been mentioned this morning, we are going through interesting times. As a consequence, every organization has a duty to consider the evolution of the context in which its activities are developed and to adapt if and when necessary. However, in doing so, the organization must be careful to take account of new circumstances without compromising the foundations of its core role and mission statement. As of today, it is fair to say that the structure, content, perimeter, and pace of sustainability reporting are going through a phase of questioning. This is true in the EU, but it is true globally as well. I attended a conference last week, and one of the keynote speakers even explained that what was a majority trend just a few years ago, launched by some major global asset managers, had just become, under the current circumstances, a minority trend, which he called vintage. So I thought that vintage was a compliment, but in his mouth it was not. No need to say that we do not share such an extreme view and find it counterproductive. But I felt that I should share with you this expression of call to radically shift priorities because it is flying around. Whether we like it or not, the fact that there are people saying this is a fact that we need to take on board. In response to this interesting situation, let me express a few personal views based upon too many decades of experience. As you know, I'm a veteran in corporate reporting. Under one caveat, EFRAG is a technical advisor under the mandate it has received. Therefore, it elaborates draft standards for the European Commission, which has the ultimate responsibility to adopt them as delegated acts. As a consequence, we have no remit in the political debate. My first point is about sustainability reporting in general. Reacting to the current moment of questioning, I would like to say again, formally, that I see the development of qualitative sustainability-related data as a megatrend. It is here to stay, if I may say so. The journey towards the destination might be uneasy, there might be bumps on the road, but there is a crucial need for reliable and comparable data. The assessment of the situation pre-CSRD, which triggered the current framework, remains very true. What was called the alphabet soup of fragmented poor quality data landscape is not sustainable. There are too many risks associated to this situation, related to poor decision-making and poor communication, green or ESG washing for companies, financial markets, and stakeholders generally. By contrast, quality sustainability-related data is and remains a prerequisite for good governance, for sustainable value creation, for appropriate sustainable finance flows, for proper business and stakeholder relationships, for public policy decisions. Ultimately, can we imagine medium and long-term competitiveness if decisions are taken without a well-founded view over the evolutions to overcome? Sustainability means medium and long-term. Let's not forget. My second point is about the pace and content of the implementation of a meaningful sustainability reporting. At EFRAG, while dedicated to reach the destination in the best of all conditions, we are fully conscious of the challenges preparers and users are confronted with. We listen carefully to the ongoing debate and are obviously open to contribute to adjustments that will be deemed necessary. Adjustments that we assume will not undermine our collective capacity to reach the ultimate goal. In any journey, having the right vehicle with a suitable amount of fuel, having the good maps and setting the right speed are key. So we stand ready to take stock of what our stakeholders and related communities tell us and to adjust on the basis of experience and on the basis of multi-stakeholder approach. If we fully understand the concept of an omnibus, we wish to highlight that every regulation is to be judged on the basis of its specific objectives and potential merits. There is in reality a difference in terms of policy objectives between providing reliable and decision-useful data and establishing rules of conduct and classifying activities. We constantly interact with our colleagues of the European Commission to establish the expected dialogue on those critical evolutions. We know that our remit is technical and understand that there is a clear political dimension to the debate. We only wish clarity as soon as possible for us, but also more importantly, for all stakeholders. Uncertainty is not good for business, markets, and society. My third point is related to what EFRAG and the European Commission have achieved in terms of standards prepared to implement the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Chiara Del Prete will cover this in detail later this afternoon. I would like to highlight the fact that what is elaborated by EFRAG is the outcome of a thorough due process based upon a multi-stakeholder approach and upon a consensus-based decision-making. In terms of substance, the CSRD requires a comprehensive approach to sustainability, and for good reasons, since indeed it is tricky to prioritize one topic at the expense of the others. Sustainability does interconnect different critical dimensions. As a clear example, one cannot address climate change without addressing the social consequences of mitigation and adaptation plans. We believe the first set of ESRS just does that and constitutes a robust reporting basis to implement the CSRD legal framework. It is key to mention at this point that interoperability with other standards is also a key achievement, which was planned from inception. A company reporting under ESRS does comply with the ISSB baseline, subject to considering a few points of attention. This company does report also with reference to GRI and is covering the TNFD framework. No duplication of reporting. We also have excellent relationships with Sensenelec, ISO, and also with CDP. No duplication of reporting. And by the same token, as stated from the beginning, we contribute to the global momentum of sustainability reporting in a meaningful way. We are committed to interoperability going forward, to what I call dynamic interoperability. My fourth point is about the mid-cap category that has been already mentioned this morning and that is recommended in the Draghi report. As a standard setter, we had a difficult decision to make when confronted with a very large spectrum of businesses in scope, from the largest multinationals to the 251 employees small, large. No need to elaborate further. We decided to consolidate the existing best practices and the emerging ISSB disclosure requirements at the time. We established a depth of information that was at par with these initiatives in order to meet the expectations and the overall goal Obviously, the bar that was set is potentially high for the smaller large. As a consequence, we have sympathy for the Draghi recommendation. A decision in this regard is urgent, since those undertakings are for the time being to report in accordance with the already adopted standards. They need a clear direction of travel now. A simplified set of disclosures might be a way forward, and EFRAG is just finalizing such a set, the one for listed SMEs and small non-complex financial institutions, which we call LSME. This could be a good basis to consider. My fifth point is about the large companies which are due to report on fiscal year 2024 and publish their sustainability statement in just a few weeks now. We understand that the lack of transposition in a number of member states is an issue, but we know that they have anticipated and significantly invested to move from an NFRD to a CSRD environment, and we suspect that most of them are ready to report even on a voluntary basis. For these companies, we want to acknowledge that the first implementation is the beginning of a journey, and that as a consequence, common sense, pragmatism, and full transparency on the level of progress achieved are key, both for them and for their auditors, together with the use of reasonable estimates, transitional measures, and reliefs. This is the true and full meaning of fair representation. 3 additional observations for clarification, if I may. The first one is about the number of data points. With our implementation guidance document number 3, we have been too honest. Sometimes I blame myself for that. And the number of data points, about 800, has been misinterpreted since it is considered too high on the face of it, while we should have explained better why it is so. 2/3 of the 80 disclosure requirements are of a narrative nature. Creating comparability for such disclosures is a challenge, so we decided to structure them by indicating the underlying elements to consider. By the way, most companies already provide those elements in their reporting. But stating it was scary. In addition, we wanted to create a single source of data in accordance with other regulations, such as SFDR, Pillar 3, Climate Law benchmark, and this accounts for approximately 130 data points. I hope this brief explanation contributes to a better understanding of what we tried to communicate and will avoid misrepresentations of the depth of what we are trying to achieve. My second observation is about sector-specific standards. We are expecting clarification about this critical part of the reporting architecture, since we understand it is a source of concern. Our goal is certainly not to overburden companies with additional disclosure requirements. In fact, once a company's double materiality assessment has identified its material impacts, risks, and opportunities, the company needs to prepare its disclosures by going first to the sector-specific standards, then to the sector-specific standards, and in the absence of such standards, or in addition, by developing entity-specific information. The 3 layers of information are communicating vessels. The perimeter of reporting is directly derived from the materiality assessment and not by the existence of standards. In such a context, we see sector-specific standards as bringing clarity and comparability in due course. In fact, under the current plan, they would not apply for the first sectors before 2027 or 2028. As a consequence, we are of course open to the potential adjustments to the timing, transitional statuses, and depth of these standards. We are also open to learning from the first implementers, because we are sure they have taken the materiality assessment very seriously. Third and last observation, and not the least, we want to insist on the critical importance of digitalization of sustainability information. We delivered the digital taxonomy at the end of August, and we can only wish that the system is in place as soon as possible. For me, this is a major source of burden reduction. If we are serious about burden reduction, let's live in a digital world. We live in the 21st century, even soon in the second quarter of the 21st century, after all. My next point is about SMEs. In fact, we worked very hard to draft the voluntary standard designed specifically for non-listed SMEs, the VSME standard, on the basis of the support we received. We believe this is the data platform that SMEs, financial institutions, and large corporates can work with. For us, this is a major burden reduction tool, helping SMEs to address their challenges, both in terms of management and business relationships. As a consequence, we would like to continue progressing boldly in this crucial area, and we are calling for a rapid public support for VSME. My last point is about non-EU headquartered groups. They are to consider the first set of ESRS, so the ones that apply to EU companies, if they are listed instruments on regulated markets and or if they have European subsidiaries falling under the scope of the CSRD. In addition, under Article 40 of the CSRD, non-EU headquartered groups will have in due course to report at group level under a specific standard, basically on sustainability matters in relation to their impacts. If they have more than 150 million of EU activities. The idea behind this CSRD provision is a level playing field for actors operating on the EU single market at a meaningful level. EFRAG has developed a specific standard in accordance with Article 40 and, subject to the finalization by the board on Thursday, we should be able to consult on an exposure draft as soon as practicable. Exposure drafts are designed to receive feedback. By construct, they are not the ultimate technical advice, which is also informed by cost-benefit analysis and field testing. Our exposure draft for this critical group of companies will envisage a primary approach embedding disclosures on the material impacts of the group as a whole, but also envisage an option to exclude disclosures that have no relationships whatsoever with the group's EU activities. The feedback we will receive on these two approaches, both from a conceptual perspective and from a practical perspective, will be very important to us. So prepare yourself, be you an EU group or a non-EU group. I cannot conclude without mentioning that today is Human Rights Day. I don't know if you have noted. Human rights are, of course, a foundational element of what we do, addressing the key transitions via reporting in relation to people and planet. So that's an important day, and it's a good coincidence that our conference takes place on that day. Thank you for your attention.
So next keynote, it will be online. Mr. Faber, Emmanuel Faber from the ISSB, Sustainability Reporting Developments, an ISSB perspective. Is it functioning?
Yeah, it looks that it functions. Okay, excellent. Welcome, Mr. Faber.
Thank you. Can you all hear me well? I assume so.
Yes.
Well, thank you to my EFRAG colleagues and dear Patrick for having me with you today. It's an important event, and I was able to attend this event for the last 2 years since we started working together. And this time caught me in the middle of a board week here in our offices in Frankfurt. And I can see from where I am already a number of friendly and known faces in the room. So Saluti a tutti, and it's a pleasure for me to address you. I'd like to say that I really find the theme of this year compelling, competitiveness and transparency in challenging times. And maybe I can offer a few perspectives indeed from our own experience over the last 2 years on how we addressed that important relationship between competitiveness and transparency in establishing the global baseline. Before maybe going into an ISSB perspective per se, let me say that you know, as you mentioned, Patrick, in your own experience as a standard setter, my experience has been as a CFO and a CEO of listed multinational companies for about 20 years or so, a bit more, is that actually competitiveness and transparency work well together. And you alluded to that actually, how transparency is also building competitiveness. And I do believe as well that competitiveness is a condition for appropriate transparency. So one reinforces really the other. Being more transparent in a world that is so deeply interconnected in so many ways can be a competitive advantage to set appropriate goals for the short, the mid, the long term, integrative goals of all the value chains and the ecosystem of the company, but also to recruit talents, to raise funds, to manage stakeholders, and many critical aspects in actually the constituencies of what are making a company competitive and a company is able over time in a resilient manner to continue to develop its purpose and its mission. So that's very clear for me. And I would also testify that over transparency does not work. And we all know that because of all its, I would say, direct and possibly indirect costs. And so that notion of a balance, as you said, Patrick, in a challenging time, I think is essential. And this theme for the conference, I think, is great. It's really a matter, overall of 80-20 on challenging times. I mean, focus on what is the core. What are the 20 that delivers 80% of the goal? And this is an ongoing process. Any company is actually succeeding because it focuses on an 80-20. And I think it's a learning process overall. And we have learned also that lesson as a standard setter. And maybe then I can offer a few perspectives from our own experience. We believe at the IFRS Foundation that better information provides better decisions, and therefore that if we're able to provide information that is decision useful on sustainability topics, there is a theory of change in which capital will actually flow to allocate at a price which is going to be competitive, the resiliency of business models. So funding more resilient companies and that are transparent on how more resilient they are, or what are the strategies that they develop to become more resilient, will drive a factor of competitiveness in both the quantity and the price of capital. This is really the theory of change that ISSB is embracing. So our experience has really been that over the last 2 years, that we needed for that, as Patrick said, recognize that it's a journey. I think there were 3 recipes that we have followed. The first is to insist on and input in the standards themselves structural reliefs that are borrowing from the common DNA, actually, of the European IFRS and the global IFRS, things like, for us, undue cost or efforts, or supportable and reasonable information, and other important accounting concepts that apply to the sustainability area, and that will facilitate the materiality assessment, the preparation of the reports, but also the assurance of the reports by the financial auditors of the company. The second thing we did was to provide directly in the standards transitional reliefs. And probably the most famous ones are, of course, about the fact that we allow for companies to be compliant with ISSB standards, even if on the first year they only report on climate, because they want to focus on climate before going to other aspects. Within climate, we offer a one-year relief on reporting on scope 3 because it's been a lot of businesses experience, and certainly mine, that it takes time to properly map the value chain, design the life cycle analysis, put the reporting systems in place, start gathering and putting in place the different methodologies that allow a proper first assessment of scope 3. And there is a limited list of another half dozen transitional reliefs that we have installed, and we've seen that this was really, after listening a lot to various stakeholders around the world, various emerging markets, developing economies, big G20 economies and blocks, and also in discussions in which Europe has been critical in the contribution to what we've done, because from day one, EFRAG and FISMA have been part of our jurisdictional working group that with four other jurisdictional standard setting and regulators around the world have met every month in contributing and giving us input and feedback on our work since May 2022. So transition reliefs were the second part. And the last one is that we design pathways for adoption by jurisdictions, also proposing various strategies that may fit where they start and where they want to land. All of that, I think, was critical, and I'm sharing this, in the spirit of what was chosen for this year's event around competitiveness and transparency, and how you can actually go from one to the other and navigate from one to the other in a manner that overall is balanced enough for starting that collective journey. I know Jean-Paul Servet this morning, the chair of IOSCO, shared his statistics about the result of this approach when he measures the current adoption momentum after his call to action to all the members of IOSCO, the 130 members. So we're very far from 130, but we're already at 30, a bit more than this, jurisdictions that have either committed to or actually completed their adoption process. Half of them have completed the adoption process and are going now to implement. The other half is still in the making. Interestingly, for me, beyond the numbers that Jean-Paul has shared, like the more than 50% of global GDP, nearly 60%, more than half of global emissions. I think, interestingly for me, it's the diversity. The diversity because we've got small and large countries, we've got extractive industries, service-based GDPs, we've got very emerging markets. We've got Sri Lanka and Bolivia and Costa Rica and Nigeria and Kenya. And we've got, of course, China and Japan and Singapore and Canada and the UK, and of course, the EU, thanks to the great cooperation that led to the interoperability guidance that EFRAG and ourselves, and I was with Patrick in Brussels the 23rd of May to announce this work and the availability that it creates for both standards to be prepared with a minimum addition that for preparers on both sides of the border. So this is really the state of play for us. And what I would say back to this notion of competitiveness, I can guarantee you that none of these jurisdictions that have been freely, we have no prerogatives in any way other than the endorsement of IOSCO that says it's fit for purpose. The reason those 30 and a number that are more coming, like once every week now, is because there's so competitive advantage for them to do this. This was driving their decarbonation targets. This was about creating more resilience in their economics. This was about accessing capital and foreign direct investments in a number of EMDs. That's about also stock market efficiencies, as we saw with the London Stock Exchange, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and a number of others, but also trade aspects. And on that particular aspect, these 30 jurisdictions, they account for about 50% of European trade. And so by ensuring that there is transparency in the supply chains outside of the EU in half of its import and export, we are basically supporting the implementation, the proper implementation of the CSRD by creating accountability, transparency, a level playing field in all these supply chains around the world, but also creating the ability that when a CBAM is going to be in place or any other aspect, there will be a robust set of data in order to properly manage trade for the EU system. So, you know, I would say that in challenging times in particular, the competitiveness of transparency is not an option. It is a non-negotiable, and this is where it should start. And I think this is probably why we see this, frankly, unexpected momentum behind the establishment of the global baseline now, which I think already connects to the EU to capital markets that are 3 times bigger than the EU. If you look at the capitalization, about 40% of the, more than 40% of the global market capitalization, 80% of the market capitalization outside of the US. So this is really a moment where I think, you know, we should, in a way, lend our hand to our European colleague. I would say that we had numerous interoperability conversations, numerous conversations about alignment. We benefited a lot from the EU's input. And going forward, I think the best way to enhance the competitiveness transparency equation will be to work now on direct interoperability. I heard you, Patrick, mention dynamic interoperability. I think direct interoperability is critical. This is what we intend to achieve with a GRI, to offer a global solution for jurisdictions and for companies that want to report on multi-stakeholder basis that can literally plug and play GRI and ISSB together. And I know Bastien is here in the room with you. So that is the vision that we think is now necessary to achieve that competitiveness together. As you all know in this audience, there is a transitional provision in the sector-specific sphere of the ESRS where EFRAG allows preparers to use the SASB standards. It's critical because if you don't use the SASB standards, there is no sector standards yet available. We believe that's a really solid base. We have proposed an agenda of work that would allow us to work together with EFRAG to build the European standards from and incorporating fully the SASB standards, and the same applies for the transition plans. But in a nutshell, and sorry, I've probably been a bit long here, but I think you know, we'd like to say it's been critical that Europe has taken the lead a number of years ago. We build from that. It's now a time where consensuses are evolving, you know, differently. I do believe, if I remember well, last year, the theme of the conference, the EFRAG conference, was the 2 pillars for success of the ESRS. I do believe that these 2 pillars are competitiveness and transparency. So that is the same theme looked at with a different lens. I'm convinced that what will make the success, which I really hope will be there, of the CSRD will be the appropriate combination of both. So happy to serve if we can, and wish you all a successful continuation of the event. Thank you for having me.
So we have now a panel advancing sustainability reporting globally for all economic players, and this will be introduced by Alexander Barson. Alexander Barson is a member of the Sustainability Reporting Board of EFRAG. He's also a professor at the University of Hamburg and chairman of the GHG Protocol Board. After that, the panel itself will have Laurence to moderate, Laurence Riva. Laurence Riva is also Sustainability Reporting member. She's the European Corporate Reporting Policy Leader at Deloitte and member of the ANC board. So I welcome Professor Barson. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome. This is not my colleague, Kirsten Lopata. Laurent, sorry for that. So very warm welcome. I'm happy to just give you some introductory words on the advancing sustainability reporting globally for all economic players. And Patrick and also Emmanuel, they mentioned some of the topics already that we all are working on, we're all thinking on, and I'm happy to give you some insights of what we are discussing on the boards, the different boards. And Emmanuel mentioned that already. Of course, the ISSB is a very important global player right now. Emmanuel said they already have 30 plus states that are involved in the process of using the IFRS standards in different ways. He said 50% already agreed to use them, 50% will use them in the future or did it already in different steps. And I think this is very important, that this is not like all the same, they're using the ISSB standards. For example, if you look at the EU, you might be surprised to find the EU on this list. And you know why it is on the list, because we had the discussion of the interoperability map. I will come back to that one later. Anyways, I think the global baseline is something that is extremely important, extremely crucial, and I really congratulate the colleagues from ISSB what they achieved in the last couple of years, because this is far away from being an easy process, negotiating with the different jurisdictions compared to the luxury we as EFRAG have to have the European Union. Okay, that was a moment where you can laugh. If you look at what we did in terms of the interoperability work stream the last couple of years and months, first of all, very importantly, we have the same understanding, the same definition of financial materiality. This sounds like very obvious, but it's far away from being obvious. It was when you look at the first draft, the PDF, we had a different definition of financial materiality. So I think this is a very high achievement to have the same definition, not only with the IFRS Foundation for ISSB, but also for financial accounting. So a very important step from our perspective. We have the alignment with GRI in terms of the definition of impact materiality. We implemented the implementation guidance, which is a very helpful document. And all the auditors in the room, the implementation guidance did not go through the EU process. It's an EFRAG implementation guidance. So if you are a company representative talking to your auditors and they say, well, the basis for everything is implementation guidance, the basis for everything are the ESRS, right? It's an implementation guidance. That's the difference. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the other interoperability work stream I mentioned already with the IFRS Foundation, with GRI. Bastian will be on the panel later. We are mapping with TNFD, and of course also with CDP, and also the social standard setting is getting more and more important on our agenda. And of course, there are more standard setter out there, and I'm pretty sure that we will have more interoperability discussions, and maybe next year or beginning of next year, we'll have another bullet point on that list, hopefully. All right, we mentioned the very important interoperability map already between EFRAG and the ISSB. This is a document. It looks like Yeah, okay, it's a document, but the process behind it, for those of you who worked on that, it's simply incredible. The amount of meetings, the discussions on technical details to really make it possible for European companies to apply the ISSB standards just with I would say, handful of additional information or changed information. This is really a huge achievement, what EFRAG and the Secretariat did there in the last couple of years. And the Secretariat and the technical, the tech, and also the board are still working on different topics like making it also digital comparable, which is of course important. If you look at all the tagging discussions we had in recent year, Emmanuel mentioned SASB, sector standards. Also there, it's important to have an interoperability. And the new standards, human capital, and also the discussion on nature disclosure of the ISSB will be an important aspect. And just as a side note, in the board, there are very intensive discussions that we should start as early as possible with these adaptation and interoperability discussions. So not developing parallel and then having an interoperability map, but doing it as early as possible to make it easier for the preparer to have one reporting approach. Okay, Patrick also mentioned the standard for non-EU companies, non-EU groups, and this is also a very important aspect when we discuss about competition of the different European companies. This is especially an important regulation from our point of view, and we will deliver the draft of the ESRS in end of 2025 to the European Commission. The consultation of course will start earlier, and tomorrow and day after tomorrow there are board meetings, and I can promise you that it will be on the agenda, and we'll have wonderful discussions there again. What makes the difference in these standards for non-EU groups? First of all, there is a lot of alignment. So compared to set 1, we also have 12 standards. That means 2 cross-cutting, 10 topical standards. So that's the same. The approach of the ESRS set 1, you are aware of that, is double materiality. For the non-EU companies, we'll have impact materiality only, because this is part of the CSRD with risk, opportunities, and resilience is excluded. So that's an important difference. In terms of the perimeter of disclosure, there's also a difference and also a discussion we had there. Also in a discussion with DG FISMA, which was about the question, you know, that for the ESRS set 1, there's a global approach, right? If you're a European company, you have to cover your whole value chain. There's a difference for the non-EU companies because they can choose between the global approach for the whole group and the so-called mixed approach. Mixed approach, you explained it already, Patrick. Mixed approach means that for those operation, products and services in the EU, there you have to document and report your impact. But of course, you are, as a non-EU company, you are free to join the whole set 1. Of course. And Inhi from Samsung will explain later what they are doing in Korea, the Samsung approach of this flexibility they have. All right, that was some input from my side, just as a start of the panel discussion. So I hand over and looking forward to enjoying the wonderful panel, which will be moderated by Laurence. Thank you.
Thank you. And I apologize because unfortunately my voice is terrible today. It's not my normal voice, but I hope that it will be okay for the session at least. I am very pleased to facilitate this panel about advancing sustainability reporting globally for all economic players. This is a topic that is dear to my heart. First, because I have been involved in standard setting for many times, many years, globally at European level, and also because at EFRAG, we are committed to help advance sustainability reporting globally and not just in the EU. Also, I'm convinced that transparency is key for better management of companies, and it is an indirect driver of actions, particularly in the field of sustainability reporting. At least this is what we hope this is going to happen with the application of ESRS, and we hope this is where it is leading to. As the EU is moving forward with mandatory standardized sustainability reporting, it is important not to operate in isolation and to understand the impact and the effect of ESRS around the world. And so as a result, I'm very lucky with this panel today. We will have distinguished panelists who will be able to give us insights about the relevance of ESRS beyond mandatory reporting, and is it a tool to support transparency and integrate sustainability in strategy. We will have consideration of ESRS outside the EU. We will discuss interoperability and global convergence, and we will discuss the role and importance of the non-EU ESRS standards. So to that effect, I have the pleasure to have on this panel. We'll start with the preparers. I have Jonggun Shim. She's Vice President of Korea Shipping, Building and Offshore Engineering, and she's currently actually in charge of ESG and sustainability of HD Hyundai Group. And so she's in charge of sustainability disclosures, looking after business and human rights management, due diligence at Hyundai. Before that, she was a CFO as well of HD Hyundai Robotics. And you used also to be a CPA at PwC in Korea. We will have also Katarina Bryan. She's head of international sustainability reporting policy at Amazon. Katarina combines expertise on sustainability policy, performance reporting and auditing, to advise on sustainability reporting policy and standards development. Before that, you have been working 13 years at the European Court of Auditors in various positions and across financial and performance audits. You hold a doctorate in economics and social science from Vienna University of Economics and Business, a master in European law from University of Liverpool, and master in international business relations from the University of Applied Science, Burgenland. Then we'll have the investors, because it is important to hear about investors, with Nathalie Deniez. Nathalie is chair of Eurosif, the leading pan-European association promoting sustainable finance at European level. Nathalie has spent more than 30 years servicing asset management industry as an external auditor, regulatory advisor, and ESG expert. She was a partner in KPMG Luxembourg and PwC Luxembourg. And so she now acts as an independent director on various fund manager and administrator boards, with particular focus on ESG and sustainable investments. She has been focusing on sustainable, responsible investment, ESG and sustainable finance since more than 20 years, contributing to several sustainability initiatives in terms of labeling and reporting, and many financial market participants to implement SFDR and address their ESG data challenges. Last but not least, we have Bastian Bach from the GRI, who will be able to give us this global perspective from a standard setter perspective as well. Bastian is the spokesperson of the Global Sustainability Standards Board. He has more than 15 years of experience in sustainability reporting standards, setting across the whole spectrum of economic, environmental, social, and governance topics, and a proven track record in facilitating consensus-seeking processes in global multi-stakeholder setting. Bastian has public speaking and stakeholders engagement experience in more than 45 countries and is a graduate of the Rotterdam School of Management of Erasmus University and Maastricht University. Okay. After those introductions, before we get into getting the insights of our panelists, you will be able to see on Slido, you will have a polling question, which you will be able to respond, and we will discover the outcome of that polling question later on. Or maybe it's not showing on the screen, it's only on Slido if you have Slido, and we will shall see the outcome of that polling question around the end of our panel. So let's start our discussion and try to get an understanding of where we are about ESRS around the world. And I would like to kick off from the investors' side. So Natalie, with the adoption of CSRD and ESRS, Europe is at the forefront of the global developments around sustainability reporting. This may trigger risks and opportunities for companies. Through the eyes of an investor, how do you see ESRS reporting contributing to the value story of a company? And do you expect uptake of ESRS by non-EU groups beyond compliance?
Thank you, Laurence, for the kind introduction and for the question. So as Laurence just briefly introduced, our organization is the European Association of Sustainable Investment Forums. So the members of our members are sustainable asset managers, asset owners, index provider, members of social society. So our members or the members of our members are great users of ESG data, and they are in great need of complete, reliable and transparent sustainable data from the companies they invest into or they intend to invest into. So why are these asset manager or asset owner needing desperately for proper, I would say, sustainability data? I think it's worth reminding, you know, what is the use of these data? Why are they important for? First is to take investment decision, to buy, to hold, to sell an investment. And to do so, they really need granular data that will enable to factor into the financial perspective of a company the ESG risk, the ESG opportunities, to be able to determine, you know, what is the future financial perspective of a particular company, or to choose between two companies in the same sector. Or if they have, I would say, sustainability target, sustainability objective at a portfolio level, in terms of transition pathway, in terms of minimum sustainable investment, to ensure that the investment they are making is aligned with the objective they promise to their own investors or stakeholder. So that's a very important use case for ESG data. The second use case is to monitor the sustainability risk, which is a requirement for many of the institutional investors today, for banks, insurer, asset manager. We just mentioned scope 3 emission earlier on. This is already a requirement to report on this, you know, GHG, scope 3 GHG emission for several years now at portfolio level. And the third use case is to report to the regulator, to report to the stakeholder, but also when managing money for institutional or retail investor, to report to the investor how the portfolio is making towards, I would say, its sustainability promises. So I think it's really important, you know, to remind ourselves why these data are important. They are not just important for the sake of publishing information. They are really critical for the investor. And today, I would say investors are struggling. They are struggling to get proper data. They purchase data from data vendors. These data remain largely, I would say, estimated data with limited transparency as how they were estimated. So if you take the same information from different data vendor, you have really different information from the same data points, which is in fact leading to higher risk for investors in terms of, accusation of greenwashing. Of course, if your input data, when you are compiling, assessing, managing at portfolio level is not reliable, you run the risk of being accused of, poor reporting because your input data was not reliable. So in that context, our members, they really welcome ESRS implementation because it will provide comprehensive set of sustainability data verified by third party, structured and also digitally available. And so for a sustainable investor, companies that really report under ISRS will clearly have a competitive advantage as they provide the information that is being required. They're being transparent how the information has been produced and the reliability of the data. So your second question about, do we expect uptake of ISRS by non-EU group beyond non-compliance? Well, what I already see today, for instance, in the private assets world, I already see asset manager doing, reports that combine several standards like GRI standards, SFDR, GRESB data, to satisfy the need of their own institutional investors and putting everything, together. So, and considering moving now to CSRD, even though they are not yet in scope. So will ISRS play this global role of catch of all standards? Maybe it's too early to tell, but I'm really convinced that there is a clear business case for this. But of course, interoperability will be key in that regards.
Thank you, Nathalie. So now let's turn to our preparers. So Shim, from a non-EU perspective, can you tell us how ESRS are perceived in South Korea and by global companies? And what are you considering with respect to ESRS in your group? What is you're considering ESRS for your group as well? What is the rationale and added value for doing so?
Can you hear? Well, actually, in Korea, so far, there have been more discussion about Korean IFRS than on ESRS because ESRS actually so far has been considered in the limited issues for a large global companies with high sales figure in Europe. But however, it seems that many companies are now starting to prepare as they recognize that ESR is about to obligate to disclose, and it's highly interrelated with CSDDD. And that then disclosure requires not only the preparation of the data and the realizing that, but also considerable internal change management. And HD Hyundai, we are the world's largest shipbuilder with a various global business. We have many European customers in various markets, such as shipbuildings and construction equipment and machineries and electricities and related equipment. It is very important to support our customers to their carbon neutrality and sustainability strategy. And based on ESRS, we can communicate with our customers and stakeholders of EU and also customers around the world who concern the sustainability. Because ESRS provides fairly systemic and very comprehensive standards. Also, we can show our readiness and strong competitiveness among other players, actually competitors. So then more than other financial and sustainability disclosure principles, ESRS requires a considerable amount of information on the management system within the company, and including how those indicators are derived and what decision-making process went through and what the undertaking value, way, and conduct. As we prepare for the disclosure on CSDDD and CSRD, we are learning that this disclosure regulation has been complemented and developed as European countries' long-standing concerns and experience has been incorporated. At the same time, we have learned that fundamental change management is necessary within the company to properly comply with these disclosure. Change management includes such as governance of sustainability and decision-making process aligned with the business strategies, data management, and the way of the analysis, and even the corporate management, philosophy, and conduct. So which means that, management system and governance should be a priority. So first of all, we start to establish internal policy and standards and then devise the indicators to metrics and in order to manage and evaluate them and systemically so that the goals and achievements can be properly analyzed and then reported to the top management to make the right decisions. So that's what we are doing recently. And we already initiate the work of establishing communications channels for the CSDDD with our major partners in our value chain, forming a consensus and sharing evaluation criteria. Supporting project, for example, like energy saving and environmental improvement for small and medium-sized partners are already expanding. And we are setting up subcommittees and advisories with internal and external experts for specific agendas such as carbon price and energy and sustainability due diligence policy. So once again, this is very profound change management, and it requires considerable time and discussions. And as we follow the ESRS very comprehensive standards, as such, the concept of governance in ESRS is rather new in our other countries, and I also believe it rather in Korea. Yeah, thank you.
So very interesting to see that ESRS triggers change management. Very interesting. Katarina, can you share with us your experience? I understand that you will be preparing ESRS reporting under Article 48I, that is at the European level. So can you share a little bit about your experience about that and the benefits from your point of view, the drawbacks that may exist, particularly for transparency obligations that makes it a requirement in other countries?
Well, first of all, thanks very much. And I also want to come back to the why we are doing this. And I think we all here have a common goal to integrate sustainability into our business across a wide range of areas. And that's beyond decarbonization. It includes, water positivity goals, reducing waste, enhancing, promoting circular economy. At Amazon, we believe that consistent sustainability reporting can act as a catalyst for positive change, really supporting the transition to a more sustainable economy. And that's both my ambition and hope for sustainability reporting. But in order to really reach its full potential, sustainability reporting has to be practical. It has to guide decision-making, and it has to be comparable across jurisdictions. Now, today we are working simultaneously to prepare for sustainability reporting requirements coming in the US, in the EU, in Australia, UK, and many other jurisdictions. And why I'm here today is, as you said, in the EU, we are working towards artificial consolidation reporting on 2025 financial year, so publishing 2026. And we welcome an EU-wide framework having that rather than a patchwork of national requirements. So for Amazon, the reporting has really been part and parcel of our pledge to net zero. So we co-founded in 2019 what's called the Climate Pledge, which is the pledge to become net zero by 2040, 10 years before the Paris Agreement. And this is not just us, it's 536 companies right now. And that's important because it's a pledge to become net zero, but it's also a pledge to report. And we looked at that recently, and we found that analyzed by an external consultancy, Climate Pledge signatory companies are collectively decarbonizing faster than companies reporting on CDP. When it comes to Amazon, we've been publishing a voluntary sustainability report since 2019. So that doesn't mean we are perfect. We are very much on a learning curve and on a journey. And voluntary reporting has prepared us for the ESRS and other reporting regimes, but it's still a step change to mandatory reporting. And let me just, two challenges. We are operating in multiple jurisdictions, so we have the challenge to prepare under various reporting frameworks, so interoperability is really important. The other challenge is actually we don't manage our sustainability businesses within legal entities or countries. No, it's much more a global management. So the last couple of years, we've already been working hard at implementing and preparing for the implementation of the CSRD. And you asked about benefits. I think it will really help us to get better, more reliable data at a much better level with more granularity. And we've built, like many other companies, an inter-company team, cross-functional with legal, public policy, public relations, accounting, finance, and the ESG reporters and our sustainability colleagues. And I think that's a really benefit that can help us to discover sort of decision useful data, which we then integrate in our into our sustainability strategy. But it's tough. It's really hard. And, it's really hard to try to keep your focus on that ultimate goal of this is not a tick the box exercise. So I think that's really hard. So to say, okay, we need efficient reporting because when we are efficient, we can actually spend more resources on sustainability action.
Yes, indeed. It should not be a tick the box exercise, and you always need to step away and ensure that it reflects the strategy and to integrate those matters into the strategy. Bastian, from GRI perspective, what is in your opinion about this trend, about the global trend about sustainability reporting, and what are the challenges that we face as standard setters, and how can we as standard setters, EFRAG, GRI, ISSB, how can we facilitate interoperability and enhanced global convergence of sustainability reporting?
Hello. Let me start by echoing some of the themes that the colleagues brought up and then go a bit deeper on the standard setting related challenges here. But firstly, to say that the CSRD and by extension the ESRS have been incredibly effective globally to change the debate on what corporate reporting will be in the future. GI has been at the forefront of arguing the case for impact disclosure for 25 years, and I can tell you that in the last 2 years, everything changed in terms of regulatory engagement around the globe. We'll see more and more jurisdictions endorsing the impact perspective, and that has to do with the leadership that the European Union has taken in that regard. And that is very important because there is a market need that is driving this, and the colleagues have alluded to this. There is an investor case. There is an internal perspective, companies making commitments across environmental and social themes, and they want to follow through on this. They need data for that, and they need systematic approaches to it. So we believe that we are only starting to see now the trickling down effects in other regulatory domains outside the EU. We also believe that we need a global system for this. And Emmanuel has referenced that we're working closely with the colleagues at the IFRS, with the ISSB, to have both perspectives, impact and the risk and opportunities represented in a global system that works seamlessly and can be a reference point for regulatory activity. And that's why we're working closely with the colleagues in the EU, with EFRAG, on the different endeavors in terms of aligning after the fact, where we have to offer guidance, aligning while we are standard setting. And I think that is the big opportunity to actually align priorities, project schedules, and indeed eventually disclosure while we actually have the chance to do that in process, in due process. This global system will be essential for success eventually, because I think it was mentioned that companies will face regulations in many jurisdictions, and they might have different ambition levels. But for globally operating companies, the sum total of these expectations matters. And we need a global system that represents the sum total of these expectations. And that's why we argue for comprehensive reporting, both on the impact side as well as on the side of risk and opportunities, covering all sustainability matters. We believe that that future can only be accomplished through digital reporting. So we are investing heavily alongside other standard setters in developing taxonomies that will support interoperability. We invest heavily in the infrastructure that exists and many preparers are using around software products, so that you have licensed contents from the standards in the software products, and you can rely on direct interoperability built into the corporate reporting software packages that you're using. And we believe that that will enable us to actually drive that comprehensive and consistent approach that is needed by all. Maybe one note about the standard setting complications. I did mention the timelines under which, and sometimes time pressures under which all of us are operating. There is a window of opportunity clearly with the sector standards going forward. We're in close collaboration with the colleagues at EFRAG and the IFRS to align on these contents where possible. And this is a bit the test for us collectively, I think, to make it work now. There is a really important case for a sector perspective in disclosure. But if this is articulated in 3 different ways across 3 different systems, on the risk and opportunity side, on the impact side, and then in the leading jurisdiction globally, that wouldn't make any sense. So this is really where you can hold all of us to account, and where we need to deliver to have one approach that works for preparers.
Interesting, indeed. Sectors are in development. And as you are talking about development priorities, I would like to ask our panelists, what do you think the development priorities to promote global sustainability reporting, what shall it be? So I'm going to ask with you, Katharina, first. What would be your recommendations to the standard setters